Imagine for a moment that your life, in all its movement, in all its confusion and clarity, was never a random occurrence, but a journey that began whole and is destined to return to wholeness. Not perfection, not flawlessness, but divine integrity. The kind of inner symmetry that can only come from remembering what was never truly lost. As Emmet Fox once taught, the story of the lost sheep is not a parable of guilt. It's a revelation of identity. It's not about getting back into God's favor, it's about awakening from the fog of forgetting who you've always been. So, before we journey inward, I invite you to like and subscribe, but only if it truly resonates with your soul. Because what we're about to uncover isn't entertainment. It's not spiritual fluff or feel-good fantasy. It's the moment where the map in your hand starts to match the terrain beneath your feet. It's the beginning of return not to a religion or a set of rules, but to yourself. You were never meant to live as fractured. You were never meant to survive on the outskirts of your own being. But somewhere along the way, a thought took root, not shouted, not declared, but whispered quietly into the soft space between identity and belief. You are incomplete. And like that, the drift began. Not into sin, not into doom, but into confusion. A subtle inner distance. A growing assumption that who you are isn't enough, isn't connected, isn't whole. And from that false premise came striving, came spiritual hustle, came the endless inner chase for what already belonged to you from the beginning. This is how the sheep is lost. Not by rebellion, but by forgetfulness. You didn't fight the shepherd. You simply looked away, distracted by the 1,000 illusions that promised completion without ever delivering it. And the more you chased, the more fragmented you became. Not because you were wicked, but because you were unaware of what you already were. The ego built a system out of that forgetfulness. It called it personality. It called it performance. It called it potential. But none of those things can hold the weight of true identity. None of those can stand in the light of divine memory. Wholeness is not something you become. It's what remains when illusion falls away. The lost sheep is not sinful, it is disoriented. It is innocent, it is tender, and it is the part of you that, right now, is still searching for home, even while standing in the middle of it. Because without remembrance, even the kingdom feels foreign. But here's what's divine about the story. The shepherd does not punish the sheep for wandering. He seeks, he lifts, he carries. This is not the voice of condemnation. It is the voice of return. That voice has never stopped speaking. In every sleepless night, in every ache you tried to explain away, in every silent moment that made no sense to your mind, but called out to your soul. And the more you listen, not as effort, but as surrender, you begin to feel the pull. Not as pressure, but as resonance. Something in you responds not because it's being fixed, but because it's being remembered. Emmet Fox never taught from fear. He taught from clarity. He reminded us that the power of the divine isn't to correct some cosmic mistake, it's to realign you with the original design. The one that was never lost, only veiled. You are not broken. You are temporarily misidentified. This is the key that begins the restoration. Your willingness to question the version of you the world demanded you become. The version that achieved, conformed, survived. The version that mistook effort for worth. And as you start to doubt that false self, not violently, not shamefully, but curiously, something begins to shift. A crack appears in the structure of the illusion. And through that crack, the voice of the shepherd enters again. Not through language, but through recognition. You remember something deeper than thought, deeper than belief, a tone, a frequency, a familiarity you never learned, but always carried. That's what return feels like. Not a journey across land, but a drop back into the center. And that's where we begin. The drift didn't begin with a decision. It began with a thought. Not a loud, blasphemous thought, but a quiet one. The kind that slides beneath the surface of your awareness and whispers, "You're not quite enough as you are." Just like that, you step outside the pattern, not physically, not publicly, but inwardly. That's how the separation begins. Not in rebellion, in thought misaligned. You don't notice the shift at first. You keep living, performing, functioning. But now, everything is tinted with the faint shadow of doubt. Doubt not just in outcomes, but in identity. Doubt in worth, doubt in source. And slowly, you begin to search. Not the holy search, not the quest of the awakened, but the restless grasping of the lost. The mind becomes preoccupied not with joy, but with becoming, with fixing, with proving. You start trying to get somewhere, though you cannot say where. You begin to pursue ideals you never questioned. You begin to chase images that were never yours. And all the while, you keep telling yourself you're on a journey of growth. But growth, when born of disconnection, is simply refined suffering. This is the far country, not a place on the map, but a misalignment in the mind. And it always begins here, with the thought that your value must be earned. From that thought comes 1,000 other distortions, each one a layer between you and yourself. You try to measure up to an idea that was never divine to begin with. You look outward for confirmation because inward feels quiet, and you begin to fear that stillness means failure. This is the nature of false identity. It cannot rest. It cannot be. It must always do, acquire, position, perform. The true self is silent and radiant. The false self is loud and starving. And the more you believe it, the further you drift not geographically, but energetically from the center of your being. The lost sheep does not recognize its own disorientation. It still walks. It still grazes. But the environment no longer nourishes. The rhythm no longer matches. It is the disconnect from the inner shepherd that creates the hunger, not the lack of opportunity. The drift is subtle. It hides behind spiritual ambition, behind discipline, behind the very structures you once trusted. But you'll know it by the fatigue, the burnout, the quiet terror beneath your polished practice. That's the signal. That's the evidence. That's the mind calling for realignment. Because truth doesn't strain, wholeness doesn't grasp, divine identity doesn't posture. To drift in thought is to live as a reflection of a false premise, and no matter how refined, how spiritual, how celebrated the reflection becomes, it cannot restore what only remembrance can. Emmet Fox understood this. The mind must be brought back before the life can change, not superficially, but structurally. The shepherd seeks the sheep not because the sheep is wrong, but because the sheep has forgotten where home is. And this is where you begin the return. Not by fixing behavior, but by recognizing the original distortion, that single thought, the one that said, "You are not enough." Challenge that thought not emotionally, but with clarity. Measure it against your stillness. Test it in the presence of divine light. You'll feel it collapse, because it was never true. It was never yours. It was inherited, injected, absorbed, but never aligned with who you are in source. The drift begins in thought, and so does the return. Let the shepherd's voice rise not from above, but from within. Let it speak in stillness. Let it undo the effort. Let it call you not to become, but to remember. You are not building identity. You are shedding illusion. You are not creating value. You are reclaiming resonance. And this begins when the mind stops defending its exile. The shepherd is not waiting in judgment. The shepherd is already walking toward you. And all you must do is stop running the thought that started the drift. The wilderness you feel inside didn't erupt overnight. It was built layer by layer, assumption by assumption, each one accepted without question. It's not a punishment zone. It's the natural landscape that forms around false identification. When you forget who you are, your inner world reconfigures itself to match that forgetting. And soon, you're living in the shell of a self busy, driven, spiritual, maybe but hollow. This is the inner wilderness, and it doesn't look like failure. It often looks like success. But underneath, you feel the ache. That ache isn't a sign that something's wrong with you. It's the soul's protest against misidentification. It's not trying to harm you, it's trying to wake you. False identity is seductive. It tells you what you want to hear. Try harder, and maybe you'll be enough. Keep going, and maybe they'll see you. Fix yourself, and maybe you'll earn peace. But the carrot keeps moving, the wilderness keeps expanding, and the more you chase, the drier your spirit becomes. Because no amount of external validation can water the roots of a soul starved of truth. The illusion works because it mimics transformation. It gives you goals, timelines, systems, it offers spiritual vocabulary. But all of it is scaffolding without structure, performance without presence, light without heat. You become a wanderer not in the world, but within your own being. You think, if I just meditate more, if I just heal more, if I just understand enough. But the ache doesn't shrink, because the ache isn't from lack of doing, it's from absence of being. Emmet Fox saw this clearly. He taught that our problems arise when we try to live from a center that isn't divine. When you build a house on personality rather than principle, it may look impressive, but it can't shelter the storm. And eventually, something cracks. False identity builds fast, but it cannot last. You begin to lose taste for things that once thrilled you. You begin to question what once fueled you. Not because you're failing, but because your soul is refusing to settle. The wilderness feels lonely, but it's the first evidence that your true self is rising. You feel lost because your inner compass is recalibrating. And here's the paradox. That wilderness is necessary. It strips the excess. It clears the noise. It brings the false structures to their knees. Because only then, only when your strategies crumble, can the original voice be heard again. That voice doesn't speak in achievement, it speaks in alignment. Not louder, truer. The sheep wasn't bad, the sheep was misplaced. So are you, at times. Not evil, not broken, just built around beliefs that never came from God. So now the undoing begins. You start to dismantle the personality you constructed to survive. You stop decorating the wilderness and start walking through it. You stop asking how to succeed and start asking what is real. And it hurts, because illusions don't fall quietly. But beneath that pain is a deeper pulse. Something whole, something wise, something still. It's not distant, it's just buried. And every time you reject the false, you uncover more of it. That's what this process is. Not healing a broken self, but removing what was never you. You don't have to become someone else. You have to stop pretending you ever weren't yourself. Let the wilderness do its work. Let it burn what's not eternal. Let it shake what can't hold truth. You're not being punished. You're being purified. Not by fire, but by memory. The shepherd is not lost, and neither are you. You are on the threshold. And the ache you feel, that's the call home. The voice never stopped calling, even as you wandered, even as you masked your fatigue with ambition or wrapped your fear in spiritual language. That voice, quiet, insistent, unwavering, was never absent. It simply waited beneath the noise. It didn't accuse, it didn't push. It called, not with commands, but with resonance, not with judgment, but with memory. You may not have recognized it. You may have mistaken it for longing, for emptiness, for discomfort. But it was none of those things. It was the divine, it was the shepherd calling you not back to a place, but back to pattern. This voice doesn't demand performance. It invites remembrance. It speaks in the silence after the noise has run its course. It speaks when the ego has exhausted its tricks. It rises in the pause after achievement loses its flavor. In the moment between striving and surrender, when you sit in the ache and do not move to fix it there, it speaks. Emmet Fox knew that the Christ presence isn't something you add to yourself. It's something you reveal by subtraction, by peeling away the noise, the story, the struggle. This voice isn't from outside. It is you, at the deepest level. It is your true tone, still intact beneath the static of illusion. It says, "You were never cast out. You only looked away." And it keeps calling. Not to shame you, not to guilt you, but to remind you of the center, of the pattern, of the indestructible divine self that no exile could touch, no mistake could break, and no illusion could erase. You heard this voice in childhood, before fear taught you to filter it. You heard it in those strange, clear moments just before sleep, or in the middle of crisis when suddenly everything inside you stilled and something sacred whispered, "You're okay. You're not alone." You heard it when everything around you said collapse, and something within you said stand. That is the shepherd. Not a figure in the sky, but a frequency in the soul. And the more you listen, not with ears, but with attention, the louder it becomes. Not louder in volume, but louder in clarity. It cuts through confusion. It separates the truth from the trauma. And it brings you home. Not all at once, not as a flash, but as a slow, sacred recognition. You remember that you were never meant to run yourself into worth. That peace is not earned. That rest is not laziness. That being isn't a luxury. It's your original setting. And once you taste that frequency, you lose your appetite for pretense. You start hearing the voice more often in the discomfort that used to make you numb, in the silence you once avoided, in the questions that once scared you. You begin to trust that discomfort is not danger. It's data. It's a message. It's your soul realigning. The voice keeps calling because it knows where you are, even when you don't. It knows what you've buried. It knows how tired you've become. It knows the places you no longer speak of. And it's not afraid of any of it, because it doesn't see the layers. It sees the essence. It speaks to the real you. And all it says is, come home. Not in shame, in certainty. Come home to your mind. Come home to your breath. Come home to your divine identity that never fractured, only forgotten. You don't need to convince the shepherd to find you. He already has. Now the work is simple. Stop arguing with the voice. Stop defending the wandering. Stop negotiating with the pain. Just listen. Not because you're weak, because you're ready. Ready to stop building sandcastles on false foundations. Ready to return to stillness, not as a retreat, but as a reclamation. Ready to hear the truth again, not as theory, but as tone. And the voice will not fail you. It has called across your deserts. It has waded through your delays. It has spoken through your silence. And now, as the old structures collapse and the ache rises again, hear it. You are not forgotten. You are being remembered. The ache you carry, the one you try to fix, numb, or transcend, is not your enemy. It is your compass. It is not a flaw in your makeup. It is a feature of your design. It points toward the part of you that remembers what wholeness feels like. And though you've learned to interpret it as a problem, it is actually your proof that you have not forgotten completely. If you had, the ache would not exist. You would feel nothing. You would conform. You would settle. But you can't, not really. Because something deeper keeps stirring a discomfort that refuses to go silent. And that is the sacred ache, the holy unease, the longing that is actually guidance. Emmet Fox called this inner pain, the divine unrest. It shows up not to torment, but to reveal. It arises not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're operating outside of your original pattern. The further you drift from wholeness, the louder it calls. The more you try to build an identity around performance or protection, the more restless it becomes. You may interpret it as depression, or burnout, or lack of clarity. But look again. It's not confusion. It's invitation. Your ache is trying to show you where you've compromised your truth, where you've mistaken achievement for identity, where you've aligned with fear under the name of safety. It doesn't show up to shame you. It shows up because you're loved. Pain is not punishment, it's precision. It shows you what is not sustainable. It shows you what cannot carry your light. It reveals the spaces where you've made contracts with unworthiness, where you've built routines around survival instead of presence. And yet, you resist it. You distract yourself with activity, spiritual ambition, or surface pleasures. But the ache doesn't leave, because it won't let you make peace with exile. It refuses to let you call normal what was always misaligned. That ache isn't asking you to push harder. It's asking you to listen differently. Not to the world, but to the voice beneath your noise. That voice doesn't demand a new plan. It invites surrender to the original pattern that still pulses under your skin. And yes, it hurts. Not because it's wrong, but because it cuts through illusion. Because it refuses to co-sign your pretense. because it touches the parts of you that are exhausted from pretending. It's the feeling of the false self dying. Let it. This is the moment where the journey shifts. Not from broken to fixed, from numb to alive. You're not being punished, you're being remembered. The ache is how memory moves through the body. It's the sound of the shepherd's footsteps in your inner world. It's the call echoing through every structure that was built without love. And, you know what? The ache isn't going away until you turn toward it. Not to fix it, but to follow it. Let it lead you. Let it pull you from patterns that numb but don't nourish. Let it show you what you really are when everything external is quiet. Because that is where the truth waits, not in noise, not in narrative, but in the ache that won't let you forget. This isn't about dramatizing pain, it's about redeeming it. You don't need to drown in it. You only need to hear what it's saying. And what it's saying is this: you were not born to live fragmented. You were not created to survive on scraps of truth. You are not here to maintain the illusion of peace while your inner world starves. You are here to return. Let the ache be your compass. Let it strip what can't stand. Let it speak, not in volume, but in direction. It's pointing you back not to a system, not to a title, not to a new identity, but to the center, to the divine core that never left, never shrank, never dimmed. Let the ache be sacred. Let it be the voice of the shepherd in a language your mind can't argue with. Because what you feel now is not weakness, it's readiness. You chase the world because you believe something out there holds what you lost within. But the far country isn't a physical space, it's a mental illusion. It's the imagined elsewhere, where worth is proven, peace is earned, and love is conditional. It's the glittering projection of lack, masquerading as destiny. You didn't fall into it all at once. You were led by false promises, by collective narratives, by the idea that something outside of you could complete what was never actually broken. The far country begins in the imagination, in the subtle belief that wholeness is something to be acquired rather than remembered. It is a state of mind that externalizes the solution, making you a beggar in your own kingdom. Emmet Fox understood that this country is seductive because it gives you something to do. It gives your mind the illusion of control. Chase success, chase enlightenment, chase approval, all while burying the aching truth. None of these pursuits satisfy, because none of them touch identity. You think you're progressing, but it's the hamster wheel of spiritual exile. The farther you go, the more you forget what real stillness feels like. The farther you run, the more alien the shepherd's voice becomes. And yet, something inside you knows no matter how far you travel, you are only circling the same wound. The mirage keeps shape-shifting. Today, it's achievement. Tomorrow, it's relationship. Then purpose. Then visibility. Always just out of reach. Always promising wholeness at the next milestone. But the hunger doesn't shrink. It grows. Because you're not feeding the soul. You're feeding the image. An image can never replace essence. The far country is built on comparison, on proving, on fear disguised as ambition. It rewards hustle but punishes stillness. It praises growth but shames grief. It teaches you to build towers of identity that crumble the moment stillness enters the room. This is not the kingdom. This is exile dressed in spiritual language. The false world will never tell you you've arrived. It survives by keeping you chasing. Its economy depends on your disconnection. Because the moment you remember, you stop needing its products, its approval, its mirrors. And that is when the return begins. Not when the far country collapses, but when you see it for what it is. When the glitter no longer blinds you. When you feel the cost of staying longer in a space that cannot house your truth. You realize you're not lost in the world. You're lost in a thought about the world. And suddenly, you pause. And the shepherd's voice, once so distant, rises. Not as a shout, but as a tone in your chest. You don't understand it, but you recognize it. That's when you know you were never meant to chase. You were meant to return. The far country doesn't have to burn. You just have to stop mistaking it for home. And when you do, everything changes. Not on the outside, not yet, but inside, a shift, a softening, a return to breath. You realize that all the things you've been seeking are shadows of what was already yours. Love wasn't out there, peace wasn't out there, worth wasn't out there. They were veiled by the lie that you had to earn them. So now, you stop, not in defeat, in recognition. You exhale, and in that exhale, you begin to return. You don't need to run anymore. You were never outside the love you seek. You only believed you were. The far country was a dream, and you're finally waking up. Waking up isn't dramatic. It's not a thunderclap or a grand vision. It's the slow and steady erosion of the lies you agreed to live with. It's the moment you stop defending the mask. The moment you allow silence to be more than just absence of noise. It's when presence becomes enough. And that's harder than it sounds because the false self has grown used to applause. It has spent years curating the performance, seeking validation, chasing belonging. To wake up is to risk letting all of that fall silent. Emmet Fox wrote that truth doesn't need to be defended. It simply needs to be recognized. And when you start to recognize it not as information but as inner reality, your defenses tremble. Because truth doesn't flatter. It frees. It tells you plainly, you are not who you've pretended to be. You are not the version of yourself crafted for safety or success. You are something older, deeper, quieter, and infinitely more alive. And that realization is both liberating and terrifying. Because waking up means letting go of the metrics you've used to measure your worth. It means exiting the system of chasing and entering the mystery of being. It's not passive, it's not lazy. It's radical alignment. You're not abandoning responsibility. You're reclaiming right responsibility, the responsibility to live from truth instead of tension, to listen instead of react, to respond from stillness instead of strategy. But the false self will fight this. It will offer counterarguments. You'll fall behind. You'll lose your edge. You'll be forgotten, because it knows that once you taste what's real, you'll never go back. This is why waking up is often preceded by collapse. The life you built from misidentification begins to shake. The relationships, the routines, the roles they no longer fit, not because they were evil, but because they were never truly yours. They were built on sand. And now, the tide of truth is rising. And it's not here to drown you, it's here to carry you. Let it. Let it wash away the performance. Let it dissolve the image. Let it erode the structures that kept you protected but disconnected. Because beneath it all is something untouched by your striving. Something whole. Something still. The return isn't about becoming better, it's about becoming honest. You look in the mirror not for flaws, but for reminders. You see past the personality and into the pattern. You feel the old armor loosen, the old roles soften. And for a moment, you glimpse what has been waiting all along. The shepherd never left. You didn't have to summon him. You only had to stop running. Now, there's space. Not empty space, sacred space. The kind where clarity arrives unannounced. Where peace doesn't depend on circumstance. Where being isn't boring, it's revelation. You don't need another teaching right now. You need to listen to what's already been spoken into the core of your being. The shepherd's voice is not new. It's ancient. It has been echoing since before the world formed. It is not instructions. It is recognition. And you know it not because you learned it, but because you were made from it. And now, as the illusions fade, as the chase dissolves, as the far country loses its hold, you are left with what is real. Stillness. And in that stillness, everything begins. The stillness isn't empty, it's full. But you have to sit long enough to feel it. Not the surface quiet of avoiding noise, but the deeper current that runs beneath all striving. That stillness is not passive. It is power in its rawest form. It doesn't push, it doesn't shout, it doesn't perform. It simply is. And because it is, it transforms everything it touches. You feared the stillness because it mirrored back what you thought was absence. You mistook it for silence because your ego couldn't hear its frequency. But now that you've paused, truly paused, you feel it. The subtle warmth, the subtle pulse. Not a voice speaking to you, but a presence arising through you. This is the beginning of the real return. Not a return to doing, a return to being in right relationship with your source. In this stillness, the shepherd doesn't say, "You failed." He says, "You're here now." There is no reprimand, only remembrance. You're not being asked to justify your wandering. You're being welcomed back into the rhythm of truth. Stillness is not stagnation. It is the space where truth reveals itself not in ideas, but in beingness. In this space, there is no agenda. There is only reality, vast, quiet, luminous. You don't have to hold it. You simply have to stop resisting it. You've spent so long trying to add something value, clarity, direction. But stillness is subtraction. It peels away illusion. It unhooks the narrative. It asks nothing from you except your presence. And at first, that feels terrifying, because your identity was built around movement, around becoming, around seeking. Stillness removes the need to chase. It confronts the lie that you are not yet whole. Emmet Fox wrote that when we touch true spiritual stillness, we step outside of time. We remember eternity not as a place, but as what we are. The ego can't function here. It has no role, no script. And so it will panic. It will offer to-do lists. It will manufacture problems. But all of that is noise, background, static. The truth doesn't need your effort. It needs your permission. Stillness is the sacred yes. The surrender not of defeat, but of recognition. You stop bargaining with life. You stop arguing with your process. You stop trying to speed up the healing. And in that stopping, you begin to see, not the world as it appears, but as it is. You start to see your patterns, not as failures, but as echoes. Echoes of forgotten truth. Echoes of inherited fear. Echoes of ancient beliefs that no longer hold weight in the light of this presence. And as they rise, you don't flinch. You let them dissolve, because you know now, they are not you. They never were. Stillness allows you to separate the signal from the static. In it, the shepherd speaks not with words but with frequency, a resonance that aligns everything inside you. You feel it not as emotion, but as clarity. It says, "This is what's real." And suddenly, your appetite changes, your pace slows, your inner posture softens. You're not trying to prove anymore. You're remembering how to rest. And this rest is not laziness. It is authority. The kind that comes from knowing, from being sourced from within, from no longer outsourcing your center to circumstances. You are still, and you are full. This is where the return becomes real. Not when you cross a finish line, but when you stop running entirely. And in that stop, you realize, you never left. You simply stopped listening, and now you do. And now the journey is no longer one of return, but of recognition. You are home. Home is not a place, it's a frequency. It's the state where your thoughts no longer betray your spirit, where the rhythm of your mind is in harmony with the truth of your being. This is what it means to be found not physically, but vibrationally, not by someone else, but by your own awareness, reuniting with its source. You've heard stories of returning home all your life. But this is different. This is not the prodigal's embrace from a disappointed deity. This is internal coherence, a coming into alignment. The fractured voice within you, once scattered across survival patterns and ego strategies, now begins to unify. That unification doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with peace. Not the shallow peace of avoidance or numbing, but the deep peace of knowing, I am no longer living in fragments. You feel your energy returning. But it's not the frantic drive you once called momentum. It's deeper, quieter, rooted. You don't need to overextend to feel useful anymore. You don't need applause to feel visible. You don't need spiritual acrobatics to feel worthy of grace. You are grace in form. And suddenly, you begin to walk differently. Not physically, but energetically. You walk with a kind of inner authority that doesn't need to be announced. You take up space without needing to dominate. You speak without needing to convince. You show up not to impress, but to express. This is the state Emmet Fox hinted at when he spoke of the Christ within not a person, but a principle, not a doctrine, but a dimension of consciousness that arises when all separation collapses. When the mind that once wandered returns to the pattern from which it was formed, Christ consciousness is not something you believe in. It's something you become aware of and then live from. And once you do, the shepherd doesn't need to guide you from the outside. He moves through you. Your discernment sharpens, your compassion deepens, your presence begins to do more than your plans ever could. Because now you are whole, and wholeness is magnetic. Not in the way of personality, but in the way of pattern recognition. Others feel it in you. They may not name it, but they sense the integrity, the calm, the rootedness. They feel the absence of spiritual performance, the quiet authority of someone who doesn't need to be needed to be real. You become the living evidence of return. And yet, you remain human. This isn't perfection. This isn't immunity from pain. It's presence through pain. It's truth that no longer wavers. It's knowing that the ache may visit, but it no longer defines you. And when it does visit, you no longer run. You listen, you bless, you remember. Because you are the shepherd now, not an ego. In essence, the same presence that called you home now moves through your awareness into the world, not to fix it, but to illuminate it, to model what's possible when a soul no longer lives in exile. You were the lost sheep, you were the seeker. Now, you are the presence, and the field is inside you. To reclaim your divine identity is not to wait for some external blessing. It is to claim what has always been yours, not through force, through awareness. Through choosing, again and again, to stand in what is real, even when the world around you forgets. Identity, in its truest sense, isn't built, it's revealed. It doesn't need decoration, it needs recognition. You are not returning to some new, improved version of yourself. You are returning to what was never touched by your mistakes, never damaged by your confusion, never diluted by your doubt. This is why the shepherd did not come searching to punish but to remind. The sheep wasn't evil, it was unaware. And that's the key. Awareness is salvation, not a transaction, a transformation of perception. Emmet Fox taught that the Christ principle lives within every person, waiting not to be activated, but to be acknowledged. It doesn't grow stronger with time or effort. It becomes more visible as illusion fades. You have spent so much time trying to become someone. But now, you realize the deeper calling is to unbecome everything that was never really you. The roles, the personas, the armor, the striving. None of it ever touched your essence. And as you let those things fall, what remains is not emptiness, it is clarity. The clarity of standing in your own divine center and no longer negotiating your worth. The clarity of no longer asking life to define you. You are not what happens to you. You are not what people see. You are not even what you think. You are the one who sees the thoughts, the one who knows the feelings, the one who remembers the truth. That truth is simple. You are not separate from God. You are the expression of God. This doesn't mean you are perfect in form. It means you are whole in being. And wholeness doesn't mean you never stumble. It means that even when you stumble, you do not forget where home is. When you claim your divine identity, you stop bargaining. You stop the if-onlys and the one-days. You stop postponing joy. You stop outsourcing your confidence. You stop waiting for the world to approve what the shepherd already confirmed. And this doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you available. Available to wisdom that isn't reactive. Available to guidance that doesn't need noise. Available to power that isn't noisy or aggressive, but subtle, steady, undeniable. This is not a high. This is not a spiritual peak. It's the baseline of living from truth. It doesn't wear a costume. It doesn't seek an audience. It walks quietly. It sees clearly. It acts from presence. And others will notice. They'll ask what changed. They'll see the lack of tension in your eyes, the way your words carry weight without heaviness, the way you stand not above, but within life. That is what it means to walk as one who has remembered. And you didn't earn it. You claimed it. You turned toward the ache. You followed the call. You stopped resisting stillness. And now, the truth lives in your bones. It's not a theology. It's not a mood. It's a knowing. One that no storm can shake. One that no loss can erase. You don't have to keep returning anymore, because you've realized you never truly left. Wholeness is not perfection, and this may be the most radical truth you will ever accept. Because somewhere along the way you were told that to be whole meant to be flawless, to be emotionally unshakable, spiritually enlightened, morally untouchable. But those are masks, beautiful, brittle masks that only delay the real healing. Wholeness is not a performance. It is integration. It means nothing within you is disowned, nothing hidden, nothing exiled. The anger, the fear, the grief, they are not your enemies. They are fragments seeking reunion. They are echoes of your innocence trying to find their place within the larger song. Emmet Fox understood that spiritual growth is not the construction of a facade. It is the dissolving of illusion. And one of the deepest illusions is the belief that God only moves through purity, that you must cleanse yourself before you are worthy of grace, that your shadow disqualifies you from divine truth. But how can what was created from love be separated from it? Your wholeness was never lost. It was forgotten, buried under layers of shame, silence, and striving. And now, in this moment of return, you realize the parts of you that you hid away were never unworthy, they were simply unseen. To be whole is not to be finished. It is to bring all of yourself into the light. This includes the confused thoughts, the missteps, the part of you that still longs for validation. You don't erase these. You reclaim them. You seat them at the table. You stop pretending they don't belong. And in doing so, you become real. Wholeness is raw. Sometimes it shakes, sometimes it weeps, sometimes it doubts. But it always returns not because it must, but because it can. Wholeness is the capacity to hold contradiction without collapsing, to walk through fire without needing to prove anything, to stand, not as a symbol but as a presence. You are not here to become spiritual marble. You are here to become transparent, so that light moves through you unfiltered, so that love speaks through you undistorted. And the moment you stop disqualifying parts of yourself, the moment you stop waiting to arrive, you realize you've been whole all along. You see that the shepherd never asked for perfection. He asked for presence, for your willingness to be seen as you are, not as you wish to appear. The journey wasn't about fixing, it was about embracing, about returning to a state where you no longer wage war against yourself. This is the truth behind the lost sheep parable. The sheep wasn't rebuked, it was lifted, carried home not because it met the standard, but because it mattered. And so do you. Every part of you, even the messy ones, especially the messy ones. There is no part of you unworthy of integration, no part too flawed to be folded back into the wholeness of your being. So now, let go of the illusion that wholeness is an achievement. It is your origin, and it is your inheritance. Live from it. Let it change your decisions, your posture, your language. Let it soften your ambition and deepen your joy. Let it teach you that healing is not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming fully present with what has always been true. You are whole, not in spite of your story, but through it. Joy, in its purest form, is not excitement. It is not the buzz of good news, the reward of achievement, or the momentary glow of external validation. Joy is a vibration. It arises not from circumstances, but from alignment. It is the unmistakable signal that you have come back into the rhythm of your divine identity. This joy doesn't rush in like a storm. It hums, it glows, it pulses quietly beneath the noise, waiting for you to become still enough to feel it. You don't manufacture it, you remember it. It was always there, buried beneath effort, tension, guilt. Not lost, just drowned in static. You begin to notice it as you move through the day with less resistance. You pause before reacting. You breathe before answering. You feel the moment, not just survive it. You're not floating in bliss, but grounded in a deeper yes. One that doesn't need to be declared. One that exists simply because you've stopped fighting what is. Joy returns like a tone in the body. It doesn't always feel like happiness. Sometimes it arrives quietly after grief, like the sun warming the bones left cold by sorrow. Sometimes it stirs while washing dishes, speaking a sentence, sitting alone. It doesn't need trumpets, it only needs truth. But to feel that joy, you must pass through the numbness. That dead zone where everything feels gray and the soul seems mute, where nothing moves, nothing excites, and the silence is thick, not peaceful, but heavy. This is the space where many turn back. Because here, you confront the echo of separation. Not just mentally, but viscerally. You feel the disconnection you once denied. This is the break, the sink, the place where the old self no longer serves, and the new self hasn't yet stabilized. You feel suspended, untethered. And for a moment, it feels like death not of the body, but of the identity you wore like armor. It crumbles, not in rage or noise, but in still collapse. And in that stillness, the old voice familiar, anxious whispers, "You're disappearing," but you're not. You're being emptied. And that emptiness is sacred. This is where the shepherd speaks again, not with comfort, but with clarity. You are not this numbness, you are passing through it. It is not evidence of failure, but of transformation. It is the clearing of the ground, so joy can rise not as a mood, but as a mode of being. And then, it comes, not as a smile, but as space. The breath deepens, the eyes clear, the heaviness lifts. Not because the outer world changed, but because something within stopped resisting. And in that surrender, joy rises not from feeling good, but from being true. This is the rise, not an emotional high, but a steady emergence. Like color returning to a landscape, like melody rising from silence, like the first heartbeat after the long hush. Joy that does not depend. Joy that simply is. You walk through your day differently now. Not chasing, not bracing, just present. And that presence generates peace. You don't have to explain it. Others will feel it. They'll ask what's changed, and you won't have a formula, only this truth. You stopped abandoning yourself. You stopped running from stillness. You came home. And joy opened the door. Peace is not what you thought it was. You once assumed peace would arrive when life aligned, when the debts cleared, when the body healed, when the people apologized, when everything finally made sense. But that kind of peace is fragile. It waits for conditions. It trembles under uncertainty. It disappears the moment the outer world shifts. Real peace doesn't depend. It abides. It arises not from the absence of difficulty, but from the collapse of resistance. It lives beneath the story, untouched by circumstances. This peace doesn't announce itself. It moves like breath, like gravity, like memory from before time. And you begin to feel it not as an achievement, but as a return to natural law. The law that says, you are not separate. You were never alone. There is no part of you unaccounted for in the divine equation. Emmet Fox hinted at this often, this state of spiritual equilibrium, where the mind no longer pulls away from itself, where desire stops being panic and becomes clarity, where the nervous anticipation fades and your presence becomes enough. But you don't land here by accident. You arrive when all other strategies fail, when the last attempt to control has exhausted itself, when the mind, burned by its own loops, finally softens not from defeat, but from realization. Peace is not the product of victory. It is what's left when the war within dissolves. You don't reach for it anymore. You realize it's been here waiting underneath every anxious thought, every defense, every act of self-protection. And when you finally sit still long enough to notice, it meets you like an old friend, no judgment, just remembrance. You find that peace speaks with no words. It doesn't argue. It doesn't convince. It simply is. And in its presence, you no longer have to try so hard. You don't need to justify your becoming. You don't need to prove your worthiness, because peace doesn't measure, it witnesses. This is what you've been missing, not information, not instruction, but inward rest, the kind that doesn't sedate, the kind that awakens. You are not lulled, you are anchored. But here's the truth you must face next. Peace isn't always comfortable, because when peace settles in, it brings light. And that light exposes everything that's still pretending. The roles you play, the beliefs you inherited, the quiet ways you still abandon yourself to feel safe. The stillness shines on it all. And this is the breaking point for many because peace reveals. It does not enable. It does not soothe the false self. It calls the soul forward with relentless gentleness. And so, you're invited to sit in the tension, to let the peace hold you while the illusions fall apart. You don't escape. You remain. And in remaining, you find you can hold the ache without collapse. You can witness fear without merging with it. You can speak from truth without needing to dominate. This is the maturation of presence. No longer reactive, no longer flinching, just being. Not passively, but awake, fully here, fully enough. Peace now becomes your compass, not because it always feels good, but because it's always real. It is the state from which you make choices no longer tainted by fear. It's how you speak, how you listen, how you walk into a room not to change it, but to bless it with your stillness. You don't need to be louder. You don't need to be more. You need only be true. And peace is the confirmation that truth is present. Now, the shepherd does not walk ahead of you. He walks with you, within you, through you, and that awareness quiets everything else. You are home, and this time, you know you'll never leave. You are no longer the one being found. You are the one who finds. Not because you're superior, not because you have mastered anything, but because you have remembered. And in remembering, something in you begins to overflow not with opinion, but with presence. You don't preach. You don't persuade. You embody. People feel it before they understand it. A quiet coherence in how you move, a steadiness in your words, a sense that you're not chasing, not defending, not performing, that you've stopped drawing your identity from the outer world and now live from a center that does not collapse. That's what the lost sheep becomes. Not a follower returning to the flock, but a living vibration of return itself, a field others can feel, a mirror that reminds them of their own wholeness. You don't need to explain it. In fact, when you try too hard to explain, the energy weakens. This is a transmission, not a technique. And that transmission is encoded in your tone, in your pauses, your gaze, your laughter, your stillness. You don't need to teach people what you've found. You simply live as one who is no longer searching. And that is magnetic. Not to the ego, not to the crowd, but to those who are ready, those whose ache is ripening, those whose masks are thinning, those who have grown tired of surviving and are now hungry to remember. This is not a role you step into. It's a vibration you become, not through effort, but through emptying, through the quiet refusal to pretend, through the decision to be honest even when no one is asking questions. It's here you become a kind of shepherd, not the one who drags others home, but the one whose presence makes home visible. You'll begin to notice it. People pause in your presence. They soften. They open. They confess not for approval, but because your peace creates space. You're not giving advice. You're holding alignment, and in that alignment, the divine speaks. You are not the source, but you've become a clear channel. And this clarity doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from no longer lying to yourself, no longer contorting to be accepted, no longer chasing shadows and calling it progress. You are not perfect. You are transparent. And that transparency lets light through. This is the new way you walk, not with arrogance, but with gravity. You don't demand attention, but you carry something that cannot be ignored. Something that's been forged in silence. Something that emerged only after the breaking, the deadness, the great unmasking. You are the living proof that one can wander far and still return. That one can forget completely And still remember, that one can be fractured and still become whole again. And in being that, you don't try to convince the world, you simply remain visible. That's the hardest part, to live fully in your truth without shrinking for others' comfort or inflating for their praise. To stand in your own name, without apology. You've become the tone of return. And that tone now travels through your words, your hands, your decisions. It doesn't need to be loud, it needs only to be real. Now you walk into the world, not looking for something to fix, but ready to reflect what already is. Wholeness, remembered. Light, revealed. Identity, restored. The shepherd has found you. And now, through you, he calls the next one home. The final threshold isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It arrives not with trumpets, but with stillness. The stillness that no longer threatens you. The stillness that no longer needs to be filled. It is here that you realize there's nothing left to find, only more of yourself to recognize. This is where you stop asking, what's next? Not because you've given up, but because you've arrived at presence. The mind may still whisper old questions, but the heart no longer takes them seriously. You've stepped into a state where awareness holds everything, even uncertainty, without anxiety. And this is what it means to live in wholeness. You don't transcend life. You enter it more fully. You taste food differently. You hear silence more deeply. You feel other people's pain without absorbing it. You carry a strength that doesn't need to harden. You move without leaving yourself behind. The shepherd's voice now lives within your own discernment, not as doctrine, as resonance. You know what is true, not because you can prove it, but because you can't deny it. You've become fluent in the language of alignment. This is not about spiritual superiority. It's about spiritual simplicity. The realization that truth is not a path upward, but inward. The knowing that you don't have to ascend to meet God because you never left God. You simply forgot. And now, you remember. Not in theory, not in belief, but in being. You walk as one who has returned, again and again. And every return has burned away a little more illusion. Every collapse has made space for more reality. Every ache has carved a deeper vessel for joy. You no longer run from this cycle. You honor it. You live it. There will still be challenges, but they won't define you. There will still be moments of forgetting, but they won't erase what you know now. You don't belong to fear anymore. You don't serve image anymore. You are not at war with your past, your mind, or your pace. You are home. And you've become a living invitation for others to come home too, not to your beliefs, but to their own essence. And the lost sheep? You were never truly lost. You were always held, always sought, always loved, not for what you could become, but for what you already are. Now, let the silence deepen. Let the breath settle. Let the vibration of return fill your chest with peace. The journey was never about arriving somewhere new. It was about waking up to what never left. So now, the path quiets. The mind softens. The current slows. You are no longer reaching, no longer correcting, no longer waiting for the next breakthrough to feel whole. You are simply here with yourself, with this breath, with this steady pulse of truth that has followed you through every dark forest and every bright return. There is no performance left to uphold, no ideal to strive toward, only presence, only peace. And a strange, tender joy, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but radiates through the bones like warmth from an ancient fire still burning beneath everything. The voice that once called you back has grown silent not because it is gone, but because you've become it. You walk now not with questions, but with knowing. Not with answers, but with essence. You recognize your own face, not the one others see, but the one that has never aged, never wavered, never doubted the truth of your being. This is not a conclusion. It is a homecoming, not to the past, not to a belief, but to your original awareness, the one that remembers, without effort, that it is divine, indestructible, and free. So as this journey draws to its still point, do not rush forward. Let this moment linger. Let it settle into your nervous system. Let it etch itself into your memory not as a concept, but as confirmation. You are not becoming. You have arrived. And that, beloved listener, is more than enough.